Yeah. And yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. And I know that you started your own local group, Transition Venue, back in 2009. Is that right?
Yes,
Yeah. And that was after attending one of the transition workshops. Was that the first time you heard about the transition movement?
it was. I heard about the transition training and went to that in February 2009 and felt very motivated from that to get a group going, as did everybody there. There were 60 people there, and most people went back to where they lived and started a transition group in their local government area. We started it together. Her name was Penelope.
Yeah.
Yep.
Was it like mo the moment that clicked, the moment you thought this is something that I'm definitely gonna do. I'm gonna go like 100% in.
Well, at the training, all weekend, it was a whole weekend living in, and Sophie constantly referred to the Joanna Macy work because Shoemaker College was nearby to Totnes and they often had speakers and they deeply influenced that kind of deep ecology work that reconnects thinking, deeply influenced the approach of Transition Town Totnes, what they started called inner transition at that stage. And I was already involved with the Joanna Macy deep ecology work that reconnects work, running workshops of those sort of experiential exercises. And here was someone saying you could do all this transition stuff and integrate the deep ecology work that reconnects Joanna Macy work. So that was it. I thought, yes, that's for me.
Yeah, can you tell me a little bit more about the work that reconnects?
Yeah, when I say deep ecology work that reconnects, they both mean more or less the same thing. And the work that reconnects is about reconnecting with our inner self, reconnecting with other species on this planet, and reconnecting with our ancestors and future beings. So it's expanding our sense of self beyond just me wrapped in skin to a being who's part of deep time, past and future, part of a bigger universe than just my little patch. And what I like about it, more than like it keeps me going, is the way we live in a world where if you care about what's going on in the world, you can feel grief and anger and rage almost every single day. There's terrible things happening, bombing kids in Gaza. I mean, gut-wrenching, and stuff happening locally, and violence, uh, big industries expanding more gas fields in Australia when they should be cutting down on greenhouse gas emissions. An article just yesterday about plastic on Lord Howe Island, the most pristine island, far from any other landmass. And there are birds there. Every bird has a stomach full of plastic. It's just gut-wrenching. So to live in a world where these things are happening and you care about it, how do you deal with that? And lots of people, quite understandably, decide that they don't want to know about it. It's just too hard. Or feel overwhelmed or take it all really, really deeply because they feel deeply and practically go crazy, or worse. Or you just feel, confused all the time. Or you get to be an angry activist that if you're too angry as an activist, you burn out. It just doesn't work. So for me, this approach is an approach that says it's basically embracing what they call the spiral of the work that we connect. So begin with gratitude. So if I read a terrible story like the Lord Howe Island, every bird has plastic, and I think, oh, how am I going to process this? I can still sit here. I can look at that beautiful sunshine outside or sit outside and feel the clean air and breathe it in and hear the bird song and just feel gratitude. for the space I'm in, or gratitude for some recent experience, and just feel that in my body. And then you can find ways to, safely get as angry as you like in a group. The group process is the best way. There's beautiful processes like the truth mandala, but there are small processes at meetings. You can invite people in pairs to, you might show some terrible film about destroying forests or whatever it is. And in transition groups, we can, after you've done that to people, which is a pretty rotten thing to do to people, tell them all this terrible news and say, okay, go home and do something. I love the fact that with the work that reconnects processes, you can do something to safely express that. So even in pairs in a meeting, you can say, well, just let off steam for 3 minutes and tell the other person what's going on in your head as you hear this terrible news. And people can just talk for 3 minutes and let themselves say as many swear words as they like. And, just that's a simple way to do it. And then, of course, the other person has a turn. And then maybe it would be, now just notice how your body feels, and just, give yourself permission to feel these feelings, because it's completely sane to feel angry or grief-stricken, or even to just feel numb. And so I love the way the work that reconnects acknowledges those feelings, so that we're not told how unsociable you are when you bring it up at a dinner party. Instead, you've got a way to honour those feelings with other people and honour them with each other. And then, but I love the fact that with the spiral, you go from gratitude, so you feel that, and then this grief and pain and anger and numbness. Never, ever leave people like that. If it's a group, if it's just me at home, I don't stay stuck in that. You then move to my favourite step in the spiral is they call it seeing with new eyes. And there are many different processes that you can use. A simple one is just to sit, if you're on your own, eyes closed, and just picture a different kind of world where the birds don't end up with a stomach full of plastic wherever they are on the planet. A world where we think thoughtfully before we use any product, and we don't even allow those sorts of products to be created to start with, if that's where they're going to end up. And so that's a simple one, imagining a different future, which of course is a core part of the transition processes. There are other processes like imagining a conversation with a child of the future. It's one of my favourite ones. There's a beautiful process you can do in a big group. It's called the seventh generation, and you have a conversation in pairs. The other person you picture as a child of the future, and you tell them, they say to you, tell me what it was like back then when there was plastic in the oceans and everything seemed terrible, and you tell them how bad it was. And then they might say, well, it's not like that now, and we know you had a part in it. Tell us some of your part in changing it. And those kind of imaginary conversations with a future being, to me, are incredibly helpful. It helps motivate me to do stuff, because you're picturing this future person who'll be quite grateful. And then, so seeing with new eyes, you never do all of these at once, but, different times you do an imaginary conversation with an ancestor. And there's a beautiful, beautiful process online, which I've done with a group on Zoom. You can use it even on Zoom, where you invite people sitting at their computer to close your eyes, and you do this guided imagination and think back to when our ancestors were fish and evolved into, brave enough to crawl onto land and become eventually mammals and then humans. And then imagine your human ancestors who had to deal with all sorts of struggles and challenges and move from Africa across the savannah to different places, and just picture all the gifts they developed in being able to survive. And the ones that survived are the ones that we are descended from. So we've got that in our DNA, and just picturing those gifts that we all carry from ancestors is another wonderful process. And then there are processes where you connect with other species, you know, sit and look at a leaf and think about how that leaf on a tree, a living leaf attached to a tree, needs carbon dioxide, which I breathe out, and it breathes it in, and then it supplies oxygen, which I breathe in. And so really it's part of me. So if a whole forest is part of me, why would I destroy it? So, you know, that's the seeing with new eyes. And then the fourth bit of the spiral, you've got the gratitude, the honouring our pain for the world, the seeing with new eyes, and then going forth, which is basically, okay, well, what's that phone call I'm going to make tomorrow? You know, get down to the, get the dishes done, clean up so you can get at cracking and do stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's like a wonderful process. And I think it's very similar to something that I heard. It's about like head, heart, and hand. It's like sort of like the similar process, do you think?
Well, certainly both. And I know the transition movement is very much, and the original transition handbook was a whole big chapter on head, a whole big section, and a section on heart, and a section on hands. And that's, yeah, as you say, it's probably just another way of saying it. Well, in a way, it's saying it's not healthy to just be in your head. It's not healthy to only be in your heart, and it's putting it in a negative way. But you know, and the practical is good, and it's great if you do a bit of each, and in whatever you're doing in life or as a group. And I think it's great for groups to. It's very easy for groups love hands, you know.
Yeah, well,
And
let's
why
use that.
not? I mean, it
Yeah.
all feels so hopeless. Why not just have a working bee and dig up a nature strip and plant stuff and, oh, good, we've got something done, you know, or get a community garden going or a veggie swap. And we do those things. And what I think the transition movement offers is to do those with heart. Well, the head bit is for a reason. We're not just doing it because we like digging up nature strips. We're doing it because it will help to create, if we've got in our heads a vision of the different kind of suburb, where everywhere you walk you see plants growing because they're food or because they're biodiversity for insects, then it changes changes everyone's attitude. So there's a reason, there's a head reason we do it, and the heart is partly the way we do it, and
Yeah.
and including being inclusive. So someone might rock up who, I don't know, does things differently, or you feel annoyed with them. Learning to have skills for dealing with people you find annoying, so that we don't end up becoming people need to feel included and loved and wanted in whatever we do.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, I do think the feelings that you have, the inner connection you build with your environment is something that's gonna make your like the following actions really more effective. So it's not just like doing something like without any feeling. And also you mentioned earlier about imagination. I'm wondering, do you think it's harder to do those imagination activities given that a lot of things that's going around in the world, and also the kind of like even like the frequency of like climate disaster, natural disaster we see has now become the new norms. Do you think it's getting harder to do those activity?
I think it is, and it's harder to, yeah, it is. And that's why I'm interested in Rob Hopkins' work, because he continues to believe that, well, I think he's right, that we need more than ever to, he's noticing it's harder. You get people in a group and they can't picture a different kind of future anymore. We only ever read novels and plays and films and stories of a dystopian future. And if we're ever going to create a different kind of future, we first have to imagine it. So I'm very impressed with the way Rob is running workshops, I believe, in far from where I live, unfortunately, around Europe, you know, face-to-face, in person, where groups of people are getting together. And he's found ways to get a whole room full of people to imagine. And his new book in June is going to be on how to do that, I think it's called Falling in Love with the Future or something.
Yes.
So I'm really interested in how we can learn more about how we individually and we collectively, when we get together in a group, can stimulate, imagine, make that part of the narrative in today's world, the sort of future we'd like to see.
Yeah. I think one of the things that really struck me that Rob Hopkins said is that the practice that we do almost every day is looking at those negative futures from all those news that we've been hearing, but we really do like positive imagination of the future.
And the convener of Transition Australia, Paul, is a assistant principal in a school with teenagers, and he said he was at a school camp, I think, and walking with all these young teenage boys, and he asked them, what's your vision of the future, you know, or invited them to think, just in a conversation, casual conversation, to describe to me the future you'd like to see, you know, a possible positive future, whatever words we use. He said none of them had any thoughts whatsoever of a positive future.
Mm.
And yeah, that's tragic. We've got a generation that we're inflicting on nothing to look forward to except disintegration and doom and disaster. And yet we keep opening new coal fields and new oil and gas reserves and keep expanding the airport, and you know, and then in the same breath the politicians will say, oh, but we're going to get to net zero by 2050. I don't know what they mean by net zero. I think they mean we'll keep expanding airports, we'll keep doing all this, we'll have a bit of renewable energy, and we'll call it net zero because we've paid someone in Africa to plant more trees, and somehow, I mean, it's just not realistic.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times when we see like what the governments are doing at the moment, it's honestly a bit like confusing. Like you mentioned that almost every government around the world, they have this ambitious target of ambitious climate target, but what they are actually doing is kind of opposite of the target they want to achieve.
That's right. Yes.
And yeah, I do believe that at this point, that's what makes the community action really matters because they are on the ground doing the real work.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, I cannot picture, let's supposing, and I'd like to think it's in 10 years, but maybe 30 years. I won't be alive then. I'm 82. But, you know, let's imagine in 10 years, because things can happen suddenly. The Berlin Wall fell down and people thought that was sudden. And it wasn't, because over decades there'd been little groups of people sitting around kitchen tables surreptitiously having conversations. But when it finally happened, it seemed sudden. And lots of changes in the end happened suddenly. So let's imagine there is this sudden change in the next decade, and the world really does turn around from, whoops, we've got to put the brakes on here. And we start to absolutely put every country puts an effort into stopping the no more greenhouse gas emissions and find a way to live sustainably on this planet, where survival and safety are the top priorities. And to survive and be safe, we cannot keep destroying boat we're on. So imagine this dramatic thing happens. That won't happen unless right now we grassroots people in our little community groups are starting to do this imaginative stuff. That's what could make it possible. And that's where I like Rob Hopkins. He talks about not what is probable, because we know what that is, but what is possible.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
probably go back to the local works that you are doing now. So yeah, I remember that maybe around 2017 you also worked with other people to start the national hub for the transition works in
Yes.
Australia. Was that a kind of a natural process simply because you have a lot of transition projects and it made sense to have this national network?
Mm. So yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it like how what happened during like 2000 from 2009 to 2017? Was it like a kind of smooth and easy journey with the transition work?
Uh, Smooth and easy might not be quite the description, but it certainly was energizing for me, having done that training and following the general principles and the transition handbook, and then out came the little transition video. What was it called? DVD in those days it was. You couldn't just look online. The little DVD, Transition 101 or something. But we started with just 4 people, me and Penelope and 2 other people. We sat on the little table out here on this deck on a sunny afternoon in July, actually, even though it was winter here. It was a pleasant afternoon. And we sat around the table and did the processes we'd learned, which is let's each share a gratitude thing, and then we each went round and shared our fears for the future. Why we're worried, what's the problem. And we had real fears that climate change will get really bad and economies will collapse and people will suffer. And then we did a go around. That took a while because we each perhaps had 10 minutes each. And then we went around and shared our vision for how it could be. And then we got to our going forth. Okay, that whole stuff probably took an hour at least. And our going forth was, okay, well, what do we do to get transition manuals started? We made a list. Who else do we know? None of us were particularly influential people that knew lots of people. But we each knew a couple of people, and we would ring the council and we'd run some film nights and make some leaflets and tell council to put it in some newsletter. And so we planned, as you do, and we had some events. The first couple of events, hardly anyone came, but we, got 6 new email addresses at one event and another 6 at another one. And then we had an event in January 2010, and that's summer here, and there's meetings aren't happening. Other groups are not meeting mostly. Everyone goes to the beach. So we had a meeting room available where we could, and we invited our little e-list along, and 25 people came, and we sat in that room and did the same processes: gratitude, grief, dreams and visions. And then in pairs, we got people in pairs to share, maybe in pairs it was share their concerns about the world, but then in pairs it was, okay, in the face of all this that we agree needs fixing, if you had no constraints, nothing stopping you, no constraints of money or time or energy or worrying about what other people think, just what would you like to do? And in pairs you could say for 3 minutes to the other person, well, what I'd like to do is whatever, like have every nature strip in Banyule growing food or indigenous plants. Or someone else might say, I'd like to have everybody composting and a community compost at the end of every street and whatever. So people talked about what they'd really like to do if they had no constraints. And then we got back into the big circle and brainstormed what we really will do and came up with some ideas and got going. And then we had a big look. We had, out of that, we got a committee, not a committee, a initiating group. And as Rob Hopkins says in his handbook and in the training, when you get your group going, you also plan your own demise. And I think groups around Australia need to be reminded of that, because lots of groups follow the same pattern. They got going, did lots of things for years and years and years, and then at some point faded. And I don't think that's a failure. I think it's intrinsic to the transition movement in a way, although some groups have kept going, because you're there to be a catalyst. That's what we said as our letterhead. We're here to be a catalyst, to get things happening. And we don't have to be here forever as a group. So in those years, we had a launch when there used to be a local newspaper and it had an article about us, and heaps of people saw it and came along. This is 2010 by then. So lots of people were wanting action on climate change, came to our meeting. We had, I don't know, we were expecting 30 and we got 80, something like that. And we had a person on our committee who was a really good facilitator, and he just got everybody engaged. We had people, again, in pairs dreaming up what they'd like. And then in the pairs would get together with another pair and come up with some ideas and put them on, like everybody does, on sticky notes, and a whole wall full of all these sticky notes, and then you rearrange them. So some of them are about food and some are about energy and some are about transport. Naturally, if it's local, a lot of it is food because it's something you can do. And out of that came all sorts of projects. Over the years, we ran fruit tree planting workshops at public places like a school or a neighbourhood house. We ran, we called it edible garden tours, where we invite someone who's growing stuff, food, to, we would limit it to 12 people. So you can book for this tour, we'd write a description of it, and then we had you'd go to 3 different places for the morning and have morning tea at one of them. The first time we did it, we had 4 different tours in different suburbs. Each of those, the people went to at least 2 other gardens, probably 3, with morning tea at one of them. And then all of them ended up at our place for lunch. And there was 60, I think I was expecting 50, and some of them brought their partners along as well. And so we had 65 people, and we had this massive, yummy salads, and people just sat out on the deck all around, and there was such a buzz. So I really loved those sorts of events. Of course, it meant afterwards sitting down and compiling all the e-lists and making there's the tedious stuff, but there was also this wonderful getting people together and the buzz. And so over the years we did all those, and then eventually we had some training. We got some funding from council and had 2 people who had done the Transition Town training and who did that same training that I'd experienced in a 1-day thing. That was really good. We also did some alternatives to violence training. It's more a conflict resolution sort of training that I can facilitate, and a group of us did that. And we finally decided that we also encouraged local suburb-based groups, because Banyule is a typical local government area in Melbourne. The population would be about 140,000. Now, I can't personally relate to 140,000 people, but if you live in Montmorency and there's the local train station and the local school and a lovely little shopping centre that runs between the school and the station, and the school has a community kitchen, the people of Montmorency can connect with 3,000 people. it's a much more perfect size for a community. So the Montmorency group was very active. Another group in postcode 3081 started a veggie swap, which is still going to this day. It's a self-organising veggie swap in a public place, and once a month people rock up and talk about, oh, what's that you grew, and how do you grow that, and can I take some of this? It's still going 16 years later. I'm amazed. So all these different suburb groups started to happen, with which we encouraged. And then we had what we called a local conference. And it was really, by then, each group had its own e-list, Facebook, website, etc. So we had quite a lot of people around this local government area engaged in climate action. And we got a wonderful speaker who used to be a head honcho in the oil industry. We flew him down from Sydney to Melbourne to be our speaker. And that was an evening event. And we had, I think, 140 people came to that. And then some of those people, we'd said, would you register for the evening and also for the following day, which would be a follow-up day? And about 60 registered for the follow-up day as well. So again, you give people all this depressing news, because it was Ian Dunlop was the speaker, and he has addressed the United Nations as well, and he has all these slides about peak oil and oil depletion and climate change and how disastrous it all is. And so of all the people who went to that, at least 60 of them came the next day to say, well, what are we going to do about it? And there was such a buzz at that day. It was just incredibly energising. We had got some funding from council, so we could pay a very good facilitator who could, use his drums and get people uninhibited. Because if he can be so crazy, surely we don't have to worry about what other people are thinking, and sort of loosen up a bit, think a bit more, expand your thinking. And then he organised the whole day, and it was brilliant, and out came loads and loads of ideas and plans. And then somebody put a hand up to write it all up from the butcher's paper and type it all up. We also organised childcare that day, so the people with kids. And at least out of that came it's a longer story, but out of it came various ways that eventually the local council, which used to be quite a few climate deniers on council, but they eventually got the local council to declare a climate emergency. And by then we had a lot has changed. And then somebody who loved that conference put a hand up to organise the same one the following year. That was fantastic. So it became a pattern. And then the third year, another person in our network had offered to be the organiser and do it all. And she got funding from council, and it was all happening. And guess what? It was going to be in March 2020, and COVID hit.
Yeah.
The pandemic. And so she postponed it to June. Then we had another lockdown. She postponed it to October. Finally, we kept having lockdowns, and it didn't end up happening. And somehow a lot of momentum was lost. And that's about the time. By then I'd already got involved with starting. Over all those years, the people who did that original training in 2009 had each other's email addresses. So here in Victoria, where I live, we'd had a few, not every year, but most years we thought, let's all get together. It was a bit ad hoc. So we'd email everyone and pick a time and a venue and say, come along and let's get together. So we'd have a get together for a whole day and do various processes together. Usually using open plan, what do you call it? Open space processes. And at that time, people said, let's form a hub. But no one had the energy or time to do it because they're all busy on their own groups. And then finally, there was someone whose name's Mark who lived in Adelaide. He went to the international conference that was held in England, and there were 22 hubs there, national hubs. And he went to the gathering of the national hubs, and he came back and contacted me and a few others to say, let's get a national hub going here in Australia. And so we thought, yeah, maybe now's the time. So we did.
Well, it's really great to hear like how all those different projects came about. And I find it the brainstorm group session really interesting. I'm wondering like during those like group like brainstorm process, what was in your mind?
When we had brainstorm, oh, me personally.
Yes.
Oh, well, a completely different world, actually. And if I narrow the world down to where I live, you know, it would be, I would love it because I'm old enough to remember when cars didn't dominate. You know, back in the 50s when I was early 40s, in the 40s and 50s was, I was growing up. Most people did have cars, but they didn't dominate the way they do now. And I dream of a world, we can't just continue in the direction we're going. So to somehow find ways to relocalize, and you know, I dream of a world where I'd walk up this street and there'd be a lot more people living in the houses instead of, like, I live in a great big house with just me and my husband. We have got 2 grown-up grandchildren right now, but they'll be going off setting up their own things soon, and again we'll have 3 empty bedrooms, and lots of people are living like that. So I think I dream of a world where it becomes normal again to have 3 generations living in a house, or lots of co-housing, co-sharing, or at least a studio apartment in the backyard and people living there, and more activity in the street, more people gathering in the local parks, having regular pizza oven barbecues, gatherings, just more interaction instead of all sitting on our iPhones all the time. And if we could just get growing more food, sharing food, local farmers markets, veggie swaps in every one of the local parks nearby, and kids cycling, walking, for people getting old and frail, which I might soon. I'm 82. I'll still get on my bike, but you know, there will be a time when I can't get on a bike, where it's okay, you know, there's safe ways to get older people around, but just much more local, I think. Yeah.
And probably have like a bit overview of your year's involvement with the community work and also transition work. What do you think is the biggest changes that doing all those work has brought to you personally?
Actually, it's given me confidence that I can make a difference without doing anything dramatic. I don't have to be the one that writes millions of lobby letters to politicians because other people are doing that, thank goodness. And I don't have to feel guilty that I don't, because there's each of us, and for me personally, there's things I can do that seem to be a strength. I seem to be able to enthuse people and help people feel part of a group and get a sense of what we can do if we work together. So it's given me confidence to use those skills and feel okay about the other things I don't do.
If you are asked to use like maybe a couple of words to describe your like whole transition and climate activism journey, and what would they be and why?
Can't do a couple of words.
Yeah, and I remember
Well,
you mentioned like and it was like energizing. I think that's probably a very big
yeah,
one.
I think inspiring and engaging and supporting. For me, it's really important to feel we're supporting each other. Um, and that phrase active hope, which doesn't mean Pollyanna, oh, don't worry, everything will be all right. It's not that kind of hope. But the active hope, as described by Joanna Macy and Chris Johnston. Yeah, for me, it's really important to keep believing that, like, I'm not the only one. There was a Zoom recently that Paul organised, because everything we do with Transition Australia is on Zoom. And he had this Zoom recently on the topic of hope, and he showed all these different sorts of hope and asked people to discuss which one resonates. And one that resonated with me and quite a few other people was basically that, oh my God, I know how terrible everything is and we're all doomed. And I cannot live with myself if I do nothing. I've got to keep doing stuff. I keep up the hope that something different is possible. So that's important to me, to always know that it's not, there's always that ray of hope.
Yeah, and I know that probably now you are quite busy, like doing lots of work at the same time, keeping eyes on lots of different things. Is there any like project that you feel like personally most connected to?
In the transition movement or just life generally?
Both.
Because life generally, in the bigger picture of collectively acting on climate change, I just love singing with the Climate Choir Melbourne. We get together, we do pop-ups, so we'll stand at the top of the escalator where everybody's coming from the law office with their busy, at the end of their busy day, and they're heading down the escalator to catch a train home, and we're standing at this little nook singing climate songs like bye-bye coal, bye-bye fossil fuel, hello renewables, energy from the sky, and it goes on like that.
Oh, that's beautiful. I want to be there.
And we've got our banner, so it says Climate Choir Melbourne, so people at a glance know we're not just these old people with grey hair singing some stupid song. We've got a purpose. And
Yeah, I didn't think we can like watch it online, like the choir.
we've got a website, which is just all the words. We'd love people everywhere in the world to pick up the words and use them. There's another one. We're using sunshine, only the sunshine, when skies are grey and something or other. I know the words well, but I can't remember this. But
And that's great.
they're fun words to familiar tunes on the whole. And it really does catch people. And as I'm sure we don't change anyone's opinion, but I believe that the public walking past, a lot of them care. They do care about climate change, and all around they see no one else cares. We've just had an election here in Australia. Neither leader mentioned climate change. They were trying to get us to vote for them because of cost of living or something, but climate change did not get a mention. And I think people who care can feel disheartened. So they see us singing and they, oh, good, there's someone else who cares about this.
Yeah.
So for me, that's a great thing that I love doing.
Yeah, I think that's lovely. And also, I noticed we are probably slightly running out of time. So,
Oh,
a
yes.
couple of last questions. So, if there's one message you asked to share with the people who are watching this, and what would it be?
Well, never, ever, ever give up is one thing, and hold on to that notion of active hope.
And also, this is something we do for the People of Transition project interview, is that we ask the previous interviewee if they have any question for our next guest. So the question from Richard, who's part of the Transition Together group, and is doing a lot of work on on network building transition. And the question from Richard is, if I was to ask you a question that helps me to get to know you better, what would that question be?
Um, well, what would the question be?
Yeah, what would the question be?
What would I like him to ask me? Oh, yes, I'd like him to ask me. Oh, God. Oh, dear. I suppose, what do you like doing with your time?
Yeah.
I don't know.
And what would your answer be?
Oh, no, I should have realised. I should have known about this. I've been in a Zoom where they did this to you. What do I like doing with my time? Well, I nearly everything I do for Transition Australia involves sitting at a computer, like I'm sitting now talking to you. And I don't mind if someone else is on Zoom, but if I'm sitting there doing a task, it drives me nuts. 2 hours is my absolute limit. So I do the things I have to on a computer up to a limit. And the rest of my day, I stay right away from the computer. I go walking, I sit and read a book, I play the piano, I puddle around in the garden, go and have coffee with a friend, make a phone call to somebody, and, sing with the climate choir. That's
Yeah, that
about
sounds
it.
really
Yeah,
wholesome.
yeah.
And that's probably the end of the interview. And yeah, thank you so much for doing this again.
Mm. Now that you've ended it, I just realised one thing I probably should have said in the
Yeah.
question about something I'm excited about, because I went on about the climate choir. But in fact, if I think about transition, I do feel excited about finding some way to revive or bring a new version of the transition streets. Because I do think, and you actually hosted that session,
Yeah.
which we had tech issues, so it wasn't the greatest session, but I do think there's a tremendous scope in a program that brings people wherever they live to gather together and have ongoing discussions about particular topics, and then keep meeting and creating connections that continue beyond the life of the group. I think that's something that excites me, the prospect of finding a way to do that. Anyway.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And sorry, the question I forgot to ask is that
Yeah.
do you have any questions for our next interviewee?
Oh, well, it's a trap for them, isn't it? I should warn them. But I don't have to ask that question, do I? That was Richard doing that. My question for the next interviewee: what keeps you going?
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. And yeah, thank you so much again for agreeing to do this. I really appreciate this.
Well, it's a pleasure, and of course it's embarrassing because it's me, but I hope it can help contribute to stories. I'm sure we'll have further contact, Hanyu.